My stories begin with an arrest, my own, I'm afraid, and a hand-painted sign outside of a jail in the South Seas. It was December 1977, very hot day. I had the day off from teaching at the farm school where I was employed, Tawaffa Farm School. Tawaffa in Tongan means wilderness. We were out in the middle of nowhere. I was a long-distance runner at the time, out on a hot day sweating, took my t-shirt off, surrounded by just a sea of coconut palms, nothing else, when I heard a siren behind me on this dirt road in the middle of nowhere. I turned around, flashing lights, white Jeep coming, and a Tongan policeman got out of his white Jeep and he said, "You're arrested." Now his Tongan was good, but his English was not. My Tongan was not good, my English was fine. We drove 15 miles to the capital village of Neafu. On the island of Ava'u, the Kingdom of Tonga is about 850 miles northwest of New Zealand, to place it for you. And on the 15-mile trip, I gathered, through our broken language understanding, that I was being arrested for two reasons. One was exerting myself on the Sabbath, and the other was running around topless. Anyway, we got to the jail, and that sign, that hand-painted sign outside the jail, was the first thing that I read. Now, we're here today to learn about lessons having to do with beginnings, and I'm going to begin with lessons about learning. And what I learned from that sign, well, here's what the sign said. Hand-painted, black on white, it said, prisoners not back by 6 o'clock will be locked out overnight. What's the lesson? This sign was a teacher. This talk is about teachers and what they teach us, especially about learning. And I learned something from that sign. I learned that we don't see the world the same way. Our biggest assumption is that we do, that the way I see the world is the same way you see the world. We know that's not true when we're traveling in foreign countries. We know it's not true in our own country, especially these days. We know it's not true in this very room. We all have a different lens through which we see the world because we have different experiences. But the issue of seeing is a very important issue, I think, to all of us. They say, after all, there are three tasks in life: seeing, being, and doing. And they're a hierarchy. What you choose to do is a function of the kind of person you are, or the kind of person you want to be. The person you are is a function of how you see the world. Is the glass half empty? Is it half full? There are many other perspectives, of course. But the way we see the world is a function of how we learn, of what we learn, and from whom we learn. And that brings us to great teachers. I want you to think about your own favorite teachers in your own life. I'm going to tell you about a few of mine. This is Margaret Farini. She's in room 118 of Hamilton Wenham Regional High School up in the North Shore of Massachusetts, where I was a student. She was my English junior year teacher. She loved Moby Dick. She loved New Bedford. She came from Gloucester. She's buried in Gloucester. She was very short, maybe 5 feet tall. She was very unattractive. You can't see her face here very well. She had warts on her face. She had facial hairs. Don't want to go into that because we loved Mrs. Farini. We called her Ma. She called us by her last names, by our last names. One day I was in class. She asked me a question. I gave a glib answer. I don't remember what it was, and she sighed. She was sitting at her desk. She stood up. She walked over to me, and she looked right at my eyes, and she said, "Nurse, is that how you really think?" Not too long after, she gave us an assignment, one of my favorite assignments. I became an English teacher because of Ma Farini. The assignment was choose your 2 favorite songs, play them in class, in a 5-minute oral presentation, interpret the lyrics. We loved that unit. So in 2 weeks, 24 of us gave our 5 minutes on our favorite songs. Mine were Simon and Garfunkel, The Boxer, and Simon and Garfunkel, The Dangling Conversation. the end of the unit, she looked at us and she said, "We've done a really good job. Everybody loved doing it. I mean, playing your favorite music. It was all rock and roll back in those days." But she said, "It's clear to me that you all really like rhyme, you really like rhythm, you really like lyrics. Now," she said, "today we can begin our unit on poetry." And we did. The lesson from Ma Farini, well, there's two lessons. One, when she read Moby Dick, she told us, "I read it every year, and every year I learn something new." The lesson was, there's no such thing as reading, she said, only rereading. We all have favorite books. They become great teachers of ours. But we forget the lessons of them. And Ma was saying it's important to fight the great forgetting. It's important to remember the important things in life. And rereading allows us to do that. The second lesson was that subjects in school don't come from school. They come from the real world. Poetry is not a textbook. Poetry comes from poets, flesh and blood people, arms and legs. And it seemed to me that she was also saying, what you all really want is to get into the real world. You want to learn about the real world. You want to learn about your place in it. I'm going to give you a chance. And I've thought through my teaching career, yeah, it's pretty much what we all want most of our lives, to learn about the world around us and our place in it. At any rate, I moved on to college, and the guy on the right is a guy named Whitney Stoddard. He taught us history of architecture. It was the first class, literally, I took in college. It was Monday morning, 8 o'clock. The lights went out. The slides came up. He talked about Gothic cathedrals in France and so forth and so on. His last lecture, because it was all a lecture, we didn't say a thing. His last lecture was about his favorite residence on a hill in the south of France. He finished with a flourish all at once. 125 of us in the classroom stood up and gave him a standing ovation. I was a rookie freshman. I'd never once in my life thought about clapping for a teacher. 30 seconds or so, I thought, went by. I looked at my watch. I said, how long is this going to last? 3.5 minutes later, you've never been in a 3.5 minute standing ovation, I don't think. Maybe you have. It's exhilarating. 3.5 minutes later, we sat down. The same time, next year, I took a seminar course. This was a lecture course. I took a seminar course, a guy named Fred Rudolph. The subject was the history of American education. Totally different approach. He sat down the first day around a seminar table. There were 30 of us around the table. He said, this is the first class and the only class that I will start by saying something. Sure enough, next session, we come in, he sits down, shuts up. We look at each other. Everyone's awkward, fidgeting, looking at their notebooks. Finally, some brave upperclassman opens his mouth. Off we go. A semester later, standing ovation. Unbelievable. Like-minded people talking about matters of first importance. What's the lesson of these two professors, these two great teachers of mine? I think one is that there is no best way of teaching. Lecture, seminar, very different. But I think we've found, at least in our work, filming teachers in the last 6 years, that the best teachers share one thing: a passion for their subject, a passion for learning, and most importantly, that passion rubs off on their teachers. My only regret with regard to my relationship to Ma Farini was that I never thanked her. This really bothered me. She died in 1992. She's buried, as I said, up in Gloucester. I owe everything to her, and I never thanked her. This lady, a Latvian teacher who taught me how to write English my freshman year in high school, her name is Gita Uva Grinbergs. This is what she looked like in 1968. This is what she looked like 3 months ago when I met her for breakfast in a coffee shop on the coast of Maine, and I thanked her. There's no real lesson here except that maybe the best things are the most enduring things. And some of the best enduring things are learning relationships. And here I've just taken a little aside and urge you, think about your favorite teachers through the course of your life, the ones that made a big difference. Find them and thank them. Of course, teachers, school classroom teachers, are one kind of a teacher. Books, authors are another kind. Margaret Farini gave me this book. The original cover looks like this. When I was a senior in high school, this is the reason I'm a teacher. It's called Education in Ecstasy. The lesson's pretty clear and pretty straightforward. George Leonard, who founded the so-called human potential movement, about which you'll hear later this evening, back in the 1960s, where else but in California, he wrote a book about education in ecstasy, called it Education in Ecstasy, and his claim was that learning fundamentally is a process that changes us, and at its best, delights us. And when I decided years later to dabble in architecture, I designed and built 2.5 houses with the help of this teacher, a guy named Christopher Alexander, chairman of the architecture department, California, Berkeley, a Scotsman by training. His philosophy was good architecture, good design should create spaces for events or situations that bring the most and the best out of people, make them feel the most alive. And I noticed that in those aha, eureka moments, which I've had the good fortune of having many of throughout my life, those are the moments in which I feel most alive. That seems to be the point of it all. Now, there's another book, the dictionary, which can teach you about teaching and learning. And when I was in my late 40s, not till then, much too late, I looked up the root. I was teaching English after all. I looked up the root of the word learning, the etymology of it, and it turns out it's an old English word, Leornian, Leornian, Leornian. You'll never guess what it means, so I'll just tell you straight out. It means last footprint or last furrow, in a field that you're plowing, the last furrow that you've overturned. The implication, the lesson of this is really interesting, very important for those of us who are teachers. And the implication is you can't teach somebody new unless you look back at the last place they've stepped, unless you connect previous knowledge to the future knowledge that you want to impart. After all, we can't understand anything brand new except in context. It's really interesting if you take this image a little bit further, the last furrow image. You're plowing this furrow, you turn the corner at the end of the field, you're going to plow the next field, you look back at where you've been. But if you look back and you find yourself still in that furrow, stuck, not moving forward, not making that connection to where you've been, where you're going, you get in a rut, and you can wither, and you can die. I don't think many of us want to wither. Now, movies, of course, I'm a filmmaker now, education documentarian, and movies I love, and movies are great teachers, and characters in movies are wonderful teachers. Here's the late, great Irish actor Richard Harris, who plays the Abbé Faria, the priest in The Count of Monte Cristo. And just to set you up for this, if you've read Alexandre Dumas' wonderful classic, you know that the hero is Edmond Dantes. Simple sailor, innocent kind of guy, unpretentious, illiterate. Because of treachery, he winds up in a dungeon in the Chateau d'If, where he's supposed to rot for the rest of his life. It has to do with Napoleon. It has to do with the treachery of a good friend of his who's an aristocrat who's jealous. Anyway, he gives up on his life. He wants to kill himself in this dungeon. He gives up on God. He's at pit of despair when one day he hears a noise in the cell floor, and up through the cell floor pops the head of a very dirty, tunneling, and learned priest, the Abbé Faria. And the Abbé's been digging for 8 years in one direction, hoping to get to the outer wall, as you may remember if you've read the book or seen the movie, and here he comes up. He's in the wrong place because he chose the wrong direction. So he says to Edmond, if you only help me, we dig the other way, we can do it in 4 years and get out of here. Here's the scene.
In return for your help, I offer something priceless.
My freedom.
No freedom can be taken away. As you well know, I offer knowledge. Everything I have learned. I will teach you economics, mathematics, philosophy, science.
To read and write?
Now, the issue here is learning really that precious? And what he's saying is, well, yeah, because we can lose things, but nobody can take learning away from us. Here's a quick scene from a more recent film phenomenon with John Travolta, who plays George, another simple, not illiterate, but innocent, unpretentious kind of guy who's an auto mechanic. He gets struck by this beam of light, and his brain goes into overdrive, and he starts learning like crazy.
George, 2 or 3 books a day?
At least.
About what?
About everything. You know, all the things I've wanted to know about and learn.
Like what?
Well, you tell me, Raj. I mean, what have you always wanted to know about and learn? Think about it.
So then I ran into trouble because I read a book called Siddhartha, which has a little bit of a problematic passage in it about teaching. And the problematic passage says, slowly the thinker went on his way and asked himself, what is it that you wanted to learn from teaching and teachers? And although they taught you much, why was it that they could not teach you? After a while, we're on our own. We're past teachers. And in this clip right here,
Who was taxing them?
What stays constant? I mean, part of what stays constant is me. I remain and the learning continues.
She made you feel like you were going to be somebody, no matter what. She was there. And she was, throughout my life, she has been there.
What do your mom and me and other people, and you, when you buy stuff sometimes at the store, you pay sales tax, what does the government do with that money?
And the positive cycle of learning continues because you had an influence on that as an educator.
So Amy is a great teacher, veteran teacher. She lives out in northwestern Connecticut. And we've picked her because we were interested in the self and learning and self-directed learning. And we made this movie called Passion to Teach. It's mostly about learning by doing instead of sitting receiving. It puts the learner in the front and center seat. It puts the responsibility on him or her. Mirror, mirror. I'm not interested in the story, but the title, Mirror, Mirror, brings me to my conclusion. Mirror, mirror on the wall, who's the best teacher of them all? I think when you look into the mirror, the person looking back at you is your best teacher. After all, you're the only companion who stays with you all your life. And as you try to find out your place in the world, you're your own best coach. And the best coaches, as Bill Belichick would say, put their players in positions to win. I urge you to put yourself as your own coach in a position to learn. Choose to be your own best teacher. Thank you, teachers. Thank you, veterans. Thank you all for the listening ear.